Historically, Americans have often been regarded as more individualistic than Western Europeans. This was one of the distinguishing features of America that struck the French social philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville when he visited the United States between 1831 and 1832. He marveled at the relative absence of government from American life. In Europe, by contrast, from the beginning of the Middle Ages until the present, guild culture, mercantilism, and monarchical absolutism had all sought the progressive realization of economic security through social organizations wielding political and legal power, backed up and guided by a state committed to a top-down coordination of economic life. Now, in the modern era, this set of social priorities has found expression in the rise of the social democratic welfare state. Writing in 1950, Walter Eucken lamented that in Europe, it is now usual to regard security and freedom as antithetical. Security is said to require a renunciation of freedom. Modern man is believed to be indifferent to freedom. What he wants above all is security. In an insightful 2011 article, the political analyst Yuval Levin defined that security this way: from birth to death, citizens should be ensconced in a series of protections and benefits intended to shield them from the harsh edges of the market and allow them to pursue dignified, fulfilling lives. Universal child care, universal health care, universal public schooling and higher education, welfare benefits for the poor, generous labor protections for workers, dexterous management of the levers of the economy to ease the cycles of boom and bust, skillful direction of public funds to spur private productivity and efficiency, and finally, pensions for the elderly. Each component would be overseen by a competent and rational bureaucracy. By contrast, America, while it certainly does have a large and growing welfare state, also has a long history and contemporary practice of private associations addressing social and economic problems. Individualism and emphasis on market culture, as de Tocqueville discovered, is not symptomatic of a callous disregard by Americans of their fellow citizens. In fact, de Tocqueville noted that self-interest properly understood was the way by which Americans combated selfishness. In America, de Tocqueville wrote, everyone, rich and poor, believed that by serving his fellows, man serves himself and that doing good is to his private advantage. Creating wealth, for example, requires us to be attentive to what others, i.e. consumers, want or might desire. Successful and consistent wealth creation requires certain moral habits, including prudent risk-taking, foresight, courage, and tenacity. The development of such virtues makes us better human beings than would their opposite: recklessness or timidity, short-sightedness, cowardice, and laziness. The results of these divergent economic and political priorities between the two continents has real-world implications. For example, in 2003, the European Commission published a green paper entitled Entrepreneurship in Europe. It focused on two questions. Why did relatively few Europeans set up their own businesses? And why were so few European businesses growing? After 5 years of studying the issue, the Commission found that Europeans preferred the security of being employed to the risk of being self-employed by 49% to 45%. In the US, by contrast, a 55% majority of respondents would opt for self-employment, while just over a third, 36%, would prefer to be an employee. But these priorities and their effects seem to be changing. In 2002, 80% of Americans surveyed expressed a strong or somewhat favorable view of free markets. 8 years later, following the crash of 2008, the figure had fallen to 59%. Further, from the Bush administration's heavy spending and fiscal stimulus programs to the acceleration of deficit spending and a general expansion of government economic intervention and the welfare state under President Obama, there is a growing sense that America is being Europeanized. So the question we now face, almost 200 years after de Tocqueville's analysis of what made our country unique, is: do we want to embrace European economic culture and its promise of security over freedom? Do we want to live in a set of economic expectations and arrangements in which the state annually consumes close to 50% of gross domestic product, where the ultimate economic resource, i.e. human beings, is aging and declining in numbers, where extensive regulation is the norm, and perhaps above all, where economic incentives lie not in hard work, economic creativity, and a willingness to take risks, but rather in access to political power? Or do Americans still want to live in an economy in which economic entrepreneurship is rewarded, where the government's economic responsibilities are confined to a number of important but limited functions, and where the stress is upon economic liberty rather than remorseless efforts to equalize economic outcomes through state action? The answer to these questions will ultimately determine whether or not we are becoming Europe.